Good afternoon. This is Eric Christensen of the Tropical Analysis and Forecast Branch of the National Hurricane Center with the latest Tropical Atlantic marine weather briefing recorded Thursday, January 30th and valid through Tuesday, February 4th. The main weather impact over the next several days in our area will be a Caribbean gale warning with winds to 35 knots and seas to 13 feet off the coast of Colombia, mostly during the evenings and early morning hours over the next several days. Currently, fresh to strong winds and rough seas persist across the Caribbean and Gulf on the periphery of high pressure centered over Florida. Fresh to strong winds and rough seas accompany a cold front moving into the central Atlantic and ahead of a reinforcing front between the Carolinas and Bermuda. Fresh to strong trade winds and rough to very rough seas are also evident over the tropical Atlantic waters. For Friday, a cold front will enter the Gulf tomorrow, followed by fresh to strong winds and locally rough seas. Fresh to strong trade winds and rough to very rough seas continue across the central Caribbean. In the Atlantic, the reinforcing front will sweep across the basin, accompanied by fresh to strong winds and rough to very rough seas. And fresh to strong trade winds and rough to very rough seas persist in the tropical Atlantic waters. The front will stall in the Gulf on Saturday from near Tampa Bay to the far southwest Gulf. Winds and seas will diminish across the Gulf except for fresh to strong winds and rough seas off Veracruz, Mexico. Fresh to strong southeast winds will be ahead of the front off the coast of northeast Florida and north of the northern Bahamas. Little change in winds and seas elsewhere across the Caribbean and Atlantic, with fresh to strong winds and rough seas persisting over the Caribbean and across the tropical Atlantic waters. By Sunday, winds and seas diminish across the Gulf as the front dissipates. A new front will move through Bermuda into the central Atlantic. Little change in marine conditions elsewhere. Little change Monday as strong winds and rough to very rough seas persist across the central Caribbean and tropical Atlantic waters. Similar marine conditions Tuesday across the Caribbean, with some residual swell over tropical Atlantic waters, with relatively benign marine conditions elsewhere. This has been the Tropical Atlantic Marine Weather Briefing. Next briefing will be Sunday, February 2nd by 5 p.m. You can always get the latest graphics and information at hurricanes.gov/marine.